It's my pleasure to introduce you to Padmavajra. So Padmavajra is, he's a regular guest to Dharma Night, but as I was saying in the first half, he's a very, very special guest. We always feel very, very lucky and privileged when Padmavajra comes to visit. I was thinking about why that is. I know Padmavajra a little bit as well because he often stays in the community upstairs where I live, and so I get to see him off stage, as it were. and it's such a pleasure actually to see those kind of interactions. Well, to sort of be on the receiving end of Padmavajra, to kind of to be on the receiving end of his kind of warmth and kind of depth of connection that he just seems to very naturally just have with almost everybody, it seems. When it's funny, like when you're on the receiving end, it sort of feels like, oh, me and Padmavajra just have loads in common. And then when you see it with other people, you're like, wow, he has lots in common with people who are really different to me. like with Amli Yodin, for instance, he's like kind of watching rugby, and Justin is talking about really obscure jazz records and
obscure to us.
And he's getting really kind of it's so nice to see, because it's this genuine sense of excitement for life and excitement to connect with people as well, to connect with people in whatever they're interested in, but not in a sort of kind of empty kind of fake way of like, oh, how's the music going, or that way kind of where it's not that kind of empty wanting to connect. It's a genuine sense of how can we relate to each other, how can we be friends actually. And it seems like his life has been a sort of from what I've seen, a sort of becoming an expert at being a friend almost, and then that comes out really as a sort of, above all of these kind of interests or excitements and ways to connect, comes out as a kind of way to, and a ability to get excited about the Dharma above all other kind of interests. So certainly that's my experience of Padmavajra, is that he kind of gets me excited about life, gets me more excited about things that I'm already excited about, but in particular gets me excited about the Dharma. So yeah, really, really excited to hear what Padmavajra is going to hear tonight. So let's give Padmavajra a warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Sirinada. So I gather, I hope I got the right information, that you've been doing a series in this class on the Dhammapada, this very famous Buddhist text. But I think some of you are joining tonight, aren't you, who haven't done it? Yes, okay. So anyway, it's great to be with you all. I love coming to the London Buddhist Centre. I live up in Norfolk in a retreat centre, and it's great to come to London, the stimulation of London. It's really lovely to come to the London Buddhist Centre, to an urban Buddhist centre, to see the Dharma being practised in the city, Buddhism being practised in the city. So you've been looking in this class at this very, very ancient Buddhist text, the Dhammapada, the verses of truth, the sort of essential verses of the truth. It's probably the most famous Buddhist collection, traditional Buddhist collection, translated into probably every language imaginable. There are actually many different versions of the Dhammapada in Buddhist tradition, but the most famous one is translated from an ancient Indian language called Pali. And it really is a collection of very, very pithy verses that were collected orally originally by the disciples of the Buddha, and remembered and transmitted down the ages, and then recorded, written down, And some of these verses, people believe, get really close to what the Buddha actually taught, how the Buddha really communicated. And they are really pithy, and some of these verses are just so memorable as well. I mean, you could meditate on one of these verses and gain enlightenment, really. You know, you've got all this stuff in Buddhist tradition. Not only that, you've got all this stuff that people like me speak about and get recorded and go online and all the rest of it. Hello, online people. Very nice to be with you. But actually, all you need is one verse from the Dhammapada, maybe even half a verse from the Dhammapada. If you really got that in your mind, if you memorized it, and memorizing, learning by heart, that beautiful idiom, such an important Buddhist practice. You're getting the wisdom of the Buddha right into the center of your chest, into the center of your heart, and living from that, turning that into a living experience. You would go a very, very long way in your Buddhist practice. You really would. You don't need a lot of information. You just need the essential heart of the Buddha's teachings and turn that into a living experience. You have everything. Our teacher, Sangharakshita, who founded our movement and our order, said that I think something like the words, the verses of the Dhammapada are letters of gold, of letters of fire, and need to be kind of engraved or burnt into our heart. They're that important. He calls them literal truth. They're so important and so direct, and you really need to get them into your blood and your bones. Now, I've been given this task of perhaps one of the most difficult of the Dhammapada sections, the section on the Enlightened One, the Buddhavagga, the chapter on the Buddha. The Buddha himself, the Enlightened One, the Awakened One, the one who's woken up from the sleep of ignorance, the one in whom the sun of wisdom has risen, completely dispelling the darkness of delusion and the darkness of delusion and well, if you like, evil, for want of a better way of using it, in the sense of our behaviour that leads us to cause harm to ourselves and others. The great sun of enlightenment. So this is very difficult to talk about. And it's the Buddha himself talking about the Buddha, the Enlightened One. So the enlightened experience is being described by the Enlightened One himself. So we'll have a go. Let's see what we can do with this. Let's have a try and see what we can get out of this. I have made some notes, so I'm not flying completely solo, as it were. I have given it a little bit of thought, but even so, I'm unusually nervous this evening, which is perhaps appropriate with dealing with such a profound subject. So let's have the first two verses from the Buddhavagga, the chapter on the Enlightened One. That Enlightened One, whose sphere is endless, whose victory is irreversible, and after whose victory no defilements remain to be conquered, by what track would you lead him astray? The trackless one. That Enlightened One in whom there is not that ensnaring, entangling craving to lead anywhere in conditioned existence, and whose sphere is endless, by what track would you lead him astray? The trackless one. Wow. I mean, look at that. That Enlightened One whose sphere is endless. That Enlightened One whose sphere is endless. That's the overriding theme in both these verses, whose sphere is endless and who is trackless. Let's try and go into this, whose sphere is endless. And it's the Pali is Ananta Gochara. Ananta means without end, endless. Gochara is being translated here as sphere, but it could also be translated as domain or field. It could mean those things. So it could be whose domain is endless or whose field is endless. The Pali is very, very interesting. Gochara, very, very interesting word. Go is a cow. Chara means living. So a gochara is where a cow lives. That Enlightened One where a cow lives is endless. But what it's getting at, it's both a place in which someone lives, but also where they derive their nourishment. A cow lives in a field, but also is nourished by the grass in the field. So it's trying to communicate the whole, if you like, world, if you like, the domain in which the Buddha is operating, in which the Buddha is living. So also the word gochara was used for the monks to describe their alms round. You know, the monks in the Buddha's time and the Buddha himself, they would get their food from begging, going from house to house. So that would be called a gochara. It's not saying that the Buddha's alms round was endless, you know, just going from house to house endlessly and eating. No, it's trying to get at something else. It's trying to sort of say, well, the realm in which the Buddha is, wherever he is also what nourishes him. It's an endless realm, and he's nourished by endlessness. That's what they're trying to communicate here. Now, what on earth could that mean? I suppose it might be worth asking ourselves, well, what are we nourished by? What's our field? What's our gochara? Where do we live? What world do we inhabit? And what feeds us? Obviously, there's food in the literal sense that nourishes us, but we're also, in a sense, fed by everything that comes through the senses, what we see, what we hear, what we smell, taste, touch, and of course, what we turn our mind to. We talk about sometimes feeling fulfilled. We might be fulfilled by a meal, we might be fulfilled by a Dharma talk, or not. So nourishment, in a way, covers, many, many things. There's a famous story in the Pali text where the Buddha asks his disciples, what is the one? Buddhist texts are very, very concerned with lists, the 2s, the 3s, the 4s, the 5s, the 6s, the 7s. But what is the one? And a very, very young monk, I think he was 8, he said, I know what the one is. It's food. It's food. Everything depends on nourishment. We're taking in, everybody and everything is dependent on taking in to sustain life, both literally and metaphorically. And you know very, very well that you might have based your life on a set of assumptions, you might have invested a lot in your life, and then that thing that you've invested in, it might be a relationship, it might be a career, it might be a whole set of views and assumptions about what life is for, what life is supposed to be, that collapses, there's a crisis. And you don't quite know what to do. Because you've based your fulfillment, your nourishment, on a particular source which is conditioned. And because it's conditioned, though when the conditions change, that goes. You lose that. In fact, our whole life is, a commitment to a particular kind of set of things that to sustain us. The Buddha's sphere is endless. His nourishment never stops. His fulfillment never ends. It is very, very, it's because it's not based on any set of conditions. You could say that it's based on that which is out of time, which is eternal, not in the sense of infinite duration, but that which has transcended time and space, that has transcended all conditions. So he's operating on something that can't break up. Perhaps it's better to think of this more positively. If you like, the Buddha's creativity is endless. Sangharakshita, again, our teacher, has described the Buddha as the infinitely creative one. That's what enlightenment really means, the infinitely creative, because his creativity is not conditioned by anything. It's drawing on a source which is endless. It's very, very hard to understand. The Buddha might look like any other monk in his day. You know, there are plenty of stories, or certainly a number of stories, where the Buddha is not recognised as the Buddha. He's just another rag-robed monk. He doesn't go around with a bump on his head. You know, he might look quite grisly at times, you know, if he hasn't shaved for a few weeks. Very dark-skinned, living out in the open. He's not really distinguishable from other monks, and even some disciples of his disciples don't recognise him. But he's operating from a completely different basis, a completely different set of motivations. So this is why he is trackless. You can't sort of track the Buddha. You can't sort of predict him. You can't, if you like, work out his motivations. You can see that he's effective. You can see him, you know, plenty of stories of him communicating with somebody with great awareness, with great kindness. But you can't say where that's really coming from. It's not coming from a conditioned source. So in later Buddhist tradition, they talk about the lila, the play of the Enlightened Ones. They talk about the lalita of the Enlightened Ones, or the spontaneity of the Enlightened Ones. In Tantric Buddhism, they talk about sahaja, which means something like spontaneity. In other words, the compassion isn't very hard to describe, the Buddha's compassion, because in a sense it is spontaneous. Of course, he sees the sufferings of others, but that's not where the compassion is coming from. Another way you can describe it, the Buddha is coming out of a fullness of consciousness. The Ananta is a kind of fullness. It has a kind of expressive quality to it. So that's a little bit on that Enlightened One whose sphere is endless. In some ways, you get closer to this in devotional works. This word Gochara does come up quite a bit, and there's a much later text, a very devotional set of verses to the Buddha by a goddess by the name of Bodhisattva Samuchaya, which could be translated as the sort of collection of all the Bodhisattva qualities. The Bodhisattva in this context is, in a way, the epitome of the devotional consciousness, if you like, of that you're trying to develop. And faith, devotion, reverence can sometimes intuit what the Gochara of the Buddha is. So you get wonderful poetry. How amazing the Buddha's splendour is vast. How amazing. He is like the ocean or Mount Meru, the central mountain. How amazing. The Buddha's sphere is endless. Again, Buddha Mananta Gocharam. Aho, how amazing. The Buddha's sphere is endless. The Buddha is as rare as an Adumbara flower. And it goes on and on and on, asking the Buddha to appear and even intuiting what the sphere of the Buddha is, the Gochara of the Buddha is. It goes on. Let me just try to find something. And the sphere of the Tathagata, that's another term for the Buddha, meaning the one gone to thusness, or the one who's come from thusness. The sphere of the Tathagata is pure like crystal. The Tathagata has entered the city of the supreme nectar of the Dharma. He is able to bring to beings unlimited blessings. The sphere of the Tathagata is subtle, wonderful, and very profound. No one is able to fathom the sphere of the Tathagata. Among the sages, endowed with the super knowledges, among all the disciples and solitary sages, none of them is able to fathom this sphere of the Tathagata. But I have no doubt concerning the sphere of the Buddha. May he therefore, out of love and compassion, show himself to me. In this verse, it's all concerned with trying to encounter the presence of the Buddha through a sort of meditation on his vastness, his inconceivability, meditated on with tremendous love and devotion. So sometimes we have to let go of reason, trying to nut out what an endless sphere is like, and instead drop into an entirely different consciousness filled with love and devotion and reverence, and trying to intuit, well, what would the Buddha be like? What it would be like to be with the Buddha, the mystery of enlightenment. And weirdly, sometimes when you're meditating on that and it feels very distant, strangely, you get an intuition, you get a sense, it's something like this. Something altogether inconceivable and amazing and impossible to understand with reason. So this is all part of the meditation on the Buddha, very important to bear in mind. However, there are clues to how this endless sphere opens up. I'm not going to comment on all the words in here, like victory over the defilements and irreversibility. I want to pick up in the second verse I read. That enlightened one in whom there is not that ensnaring, entangling, craving to lead anywhere in conditioned existence, and whose sphere is endless, by what track will you lead him astray, the trackless one? So that ensnaring, entangling, craving to lead anywhere in conditioned existence. I think that's giving us a tremendous clue as to what prevents us from opening up to the Ananta Gochara, the endless sphere. It's this ensnaring, entangling, craving. And when the Buddha talks about craving in this way, he's not really it's not really making a moral point. I mean, obviously there are ethical issues, don't we know it, to do with craving. Our craving gets us into a lot of trouble. Certainly it's got me into trouble. I say it as if it's in the past, as if. You do have to be very careful with craving, and we know that there are so many addictions these days. People are very addicted to things, very dependent on all kinds of things. But the Buddha's point here about that ensnaring, entangling craving to lead anywhere in conditioned existence is a kind of existential point. Craving runs very, very deep in us. It's what drives us, it's what makes us, according to Buddhist tradition. And the analysis of craving, it's not just to do with our craving for sense experience, our craving for food and sex and intense experience and all that sort of thing. You get woven into that what's called bhava trishna, craving for fixed existence. Deep down we want to be a certain way that doesn't change, that fixes things. We might say, no, I'm not really like that. But actually we are like that. We want things to remain in a particular way, or we want something to have a particular outcome, which we're very attached to. And when that goes wrong, we get, we suffer, or even get very angry, or jealous or something like that. There's this deep drive to be a particular way. That's the ensnaring, entangling craving, that to lead anywhere in conditioned existence, being a certain person in a certain way forever and ever, amen. So you've got this bhava trishna. The analysis goes even deeper. There's also vibhava trishna, a kind of craving for non-being, a kind of craving for oblivion, and don't we know it? You know that thing, you just want to, there's this weird connection, isn't there, between kind of having an intense experience. The other side of that is just wanting to be kind of wiped out for a while. Both are impossible, according to Buddhist tradition. There's no such thing as non-existence. Life will always go on and on. And there's no such thing as fixed existence. Fixed existence and non-existence don't exist. Instead, what you've got to start opening up to is this extraordinary the way things are, which is called in Buddhist tradition praticca samuppada, that everything is an ever-changing flow of conditions. Everything all the time is arising and passing away. If you wanted to be paradoxical, being is not being and not being is being. Everything is sort of hovering on the edge of existence, if you like. That great, I think it's from Heidegger, being never fully flowers. It's lovely this time of year, isn't it, with the beautiful flowers. When they're absolutely at their full bloom, they're already fading, aren't they? There's this lovely coming into being, but it's all, in that whole thing, you think, yes, it's perfect, but it's already turning. It's already turning. That's what our life is like. There's this arising and this passing. And this is what we've got to get used to. This is the world that we have to enter into. This is where what Buddhist practice is based on. If you can see this, your practice of meditation, for example, becomes very, very effective, because you start to notice that your consciousness, your mind, is not a fixed thing. It's not a fixed thing. It can never be a fixed thing. It's constantly emergent. And the trouble is, in trying to fix it, we become very limited, and we become, in the end, very frustrated and unhappy, miles away from the ananta. What the Buddha's enlightenment is all about is this incredible vision. In the text, if you read the ancient Buddhist text, it's described in an incredibly clunky way, as if the Buddha is sort of nutting out the vision of existence, but it's not really like that. Through his profound meditation, he sees, if you like, in a single flash, out of time, if you like, this vast becoming. This vast emergence. And he knows it in his bones and in his being. And then he enters the ananta. Then he becomes trackless. There is nothing fixed, nothing to take him into fixed and conditioned existence. So yes, I've been digging around in these difficult verses, trying to open up the Ananta Gochara for you, and trying to sort of see what prevents us from going into that. So let's leave that and move on to something perhaps a little bit easier, the next verses, which become a little bit closer. You get a sort of description of the Buddha's, in a sense, practice of meditation and mindfulness. Those wise ones who are intent on absorption in higher meditative states and who delight in the calm of renunciation. Even the gods love them, those thoroughly enlightened and mindful ones. A fantastic verse. Isn't that brilliant? Don't you think? No? Those wise ones who are intent on absorption in higher meditative states and who delight in the calm of renunciation, even the gods love them. Those thoroughly enlightened and mindful ones. In traditional Buddhist cosmology, you have the gods, who are all part of conditioned existence, very, very positive, but they'll fall away. They haven't reached the Ananta Gochara. Sad thing is they think they have, because it's so blissful, so good. And apparently one of the great tragedies in the universe is a god noticing that he's falling. His garlands start to wither. He starts to smell, and his God friends leave him, and he looks to where he's going, and it's a terrible moment in life. But these gods love these wise ones. They love the Buddhas. They can see that these wise ones, these Buddhas, how they are. They delight. The word is rati. It's usually used in relation to sort of sense experience. They delight in the calm of renunciation. We don't often think of renunciation as something delightful, do we? Giving up things doesn't sound like something delightful. But when you do liberate yourself from things that you're very embroiled in a way that's very complicated and drags you down, it's such a wonderful feeling, that sense of calm. And you just delight in that. And if you notice those delights, well, meditate on that. Meditate on that delight, those victories, those small victories, in relation to things that have held you back. Delight in that. Meditate on that. Let that delight grow in you. And there's those wise ones who are intent on absorption in higher meditative states. With the Buddhas, meditation is spontaneous. It says intent, but the Buddha's meditation is completely natural. In later Buddhism, they say that Buddhas, very advanced practitioners, are adorned with samadhis. Samadhi means profound meditation. Some of these meditations have the most extraordinary names, like the flower, the abundant flower samadhi, or the samadhi of brilliant light, or something like this. These are, if you like, the spontaneous unfoldings of an enlightened being, entering into these different samadhis. You even have descriptions of samadhis to do with the samadhi of communicating with people effectively. That's seen as a profound meditation, communicating the Dharma effectively to others. So in other words, there's no difference between sitting in meditation and life itself, and it's unfolding naturally. It's the Anantagochara, the endless sphere. But then, towards the end, you've got this really lovely phrase, those thoroughly enlightened and mindful ones. Thoroughly enlightened. It's not a partial enlightenment of the Buddhas. It's thorough and mindful ones. And the word for mindfulness is satimat. Satimat. Very, not easy to translate, but thankfully, Sangharakshita, our teacher, goes into it. That just taking it, the word mindful in English as a translation of this word satimat. Mindfulness means everything is full of mind. Everything is pervaded by mind, not in the sense of thought. That's not mindfulness in Buddhist tradition. When an enlightened person has the experience that everything is pervaded by awareness. In a sense, with a Buddha, there is no limit to awareness. He doesn't regard awareness as his own awareness. It's not that there's a kind of awareness inside of him looking out. It's more that awareness perfumes all experience. It perfumes the whole of life. It perfumes everybody. It perfumes everything. Everything, therefore, is alive, vividly alive to the enlightened ones all the time. This rich mindfulness. So, again, we can have a sense of that. When you're practicing mindfulness, and I know, there's lots of emphasis on mindfulness at the London Buddhist Centre, lots of mindfulness courses, Life with Full Attention, that's a good title. But what you're looking for is to relax into living a life which is pervaded by this quality of awareness, of knowing, in a sense, a quality of wisdom and compassion, which pervades everything. Everything you do, everything you see, all the people that you meet. It's beyond subject and object. It's beyond self and other. So this is the kind of gives us a clue again to the quality of the Buddha. So our attempts at mindfulness, maybe even our fumbling attempts at mindfulness, are the entry into this vast and deep mindfulness of the Buddha. So even though we're talking about something very, very profound in these verses to do with the Buddha, we can make a start in moving in the direction of, yes, the endless sphere of the Buddha through our practice of mindfulness. The next verse, which I'm going to skip, is about the rarity of attaining the human life, of how difficult it is to, how human life can be very, very difficult, how rare it is to hear the Dharma, and how rare it is to come into contact with the enlightened ones. It's a verse to sort of wake us up to this very, very precious human life that we have. We don't have this life for very long, and it's extremely precious, and the human life form is regarded as very, very special in Buddhist tradition because we have this seed of awareness, this seed of mindfulness, this seed of enlightenment. So don't waste it. Don't squander this life. Use it to move in the direction of the enlightened ones. But then the next verses are, in a sense, the practice. It's describing the practice and the essential teachings of the Buddha. Very, very famous verses indeed. Let me just read them to you. The first ones you'll be very aware of. The not doing of anything evil, undertaking to do what is ethically skillful, and complete purification of the mind. This is the ordinance of the enlightened ones. Patient endurance is the best form of penance. Nirvana is the highest, say the enlightened ones. No true goer forth is one who injures another, nor is he a true ascetic who persecutes others. Not to speak evil, not to injure, to exercise restraint through the observance of the monastic code of conduct, to be moderate in diet, and to occupy oneself with higher mental states. This is the ordinance of the enlightened ones. Now, some of this might seem a bit obscure, but apparently this is the oldest kind of code of conduct of the Buddhist tradition. These verses would have been recited at the gatherings of the Buddha's disciples on the new moon days and the full moon days. It's a kind of essential summary of the Buddha's teachings. I haven't got the time to go into them all, but this first one, the not doing of anything evil. Evil, people have obviously difficulties with the word evil. It's papa in Pali and Sanskrit. It's very hard to translate it any other way. It's not evil in the sense of a sort of theological force or something like that. It's more, perhaps another way of translating it is just bad. Just bad. You know that thing. Where, well, we do bad sometimes, don't we? Well, you even got it in the language now, haven't you? Everybody seems to say "my bad," don't they? When they do something wrong, it's like it's cool to say "my bad," isn't it? So good. They don't say "my evil," they say "my bad." But it's that thing that you do, motivated, by greed and hatred and mental confusion and jealousy and pride and all the other ugly brothers and sisters, that harms you and harms others. And okay, it might seem quite innocuous and a bit heavy to call it evil, but imagine that building up. Imagine that under other circumstances, when you're under pressure, under really serious pressure or proper provocation. That could do something really bad. That could really have a very negative effect. You get this thing in Buddhist tradition, you see danger in the smallest faults, in the most trifling faults, as an old translation has it. Those little things, take them seriously. because they accumulate. Don't give in to that, way of speaking where you keep, hurting someone or doing yourself down or something. Don't keep entertaining that resentment. Don't think that that's not going to have any effect, because one of the things that the insights of the Buddha is that everything is having an effect. Everything you do with an intention is having an effect. It's all gonna bear fruit eventually. So take it seriously. So not doing of anything evil, undertaking to do what is ethically skillful. So we're on to the positive. Really committing yourself, to doing those things which are really good, which are skilled in bringing about your growth in the direction of enlightenment. The very obvious things. Awareness and kindness and generosity and mindfulness and all the rest of it. Undertake that, commit yourself to that. And complete purification of the mind. Again, purification, perhaps for some people, might say, well, purity, don't fancy purity, sounds a bit, a bit goody-goody. But purity is power. Because purity means something that isn't mixed. You talk about pure liquor, don't you? It's powerful, it's a potent hooch if it's unmixed. Well, what about a mind that is so concentrated on the good? That's what a pure mind is. A mind absolutely purified of any kind of ill will, any kind of craving, any kind of confusion, any kind of unclarity. That kind of purity of consciousness is going to start opening up the way things are. It's going to start enabling you to see the way things are. Complete purification of the mind. This is the ordinance of the Enlightened One. So it's not just the teaching. The word is sasana. You don't often hear this word. It's really important. I can't put it any other way. It means that this teaching has an authority for you, not in the sense of you're scared if you do it wrong. It has a weight for you because you've definitely decided that the Buddha is your teacher. You've made that shift. If you like, your heart has gone on to the attainment of the endless sphere, the Ananta Gochara. You want to become something like the Buddha in your own life. You want to become one of those wise ones. So this teaching, the teaching that leads to that, has an authority for you, a claim on you. It's an ordinance. It's not something to be that you just want to pick up and put down, you're casual about. No, this is real. He is my teacher. This is the teaching. This is what I'm going to take into my life. It's not forced upon you. It's very, very important. There's nobody can force a teaching on you. That's really, really crucial. You have to be free to completely accept or completely reject the teaching. But there's a certain point, I think, when you've touched that, made that connection with the Buddha, with the path, and so on, you can't do that anymore. It's kind of really got inside you, and you think, no, even though I don't feel like doing it today, even though I don't want to get up this morning, no, I'm going to get up and I'm going to concentrate on my breaths. Got to do that. I've got to do that thing. You can't sort of step back from it. And then you've got these verses on. I'll just do the next verses. This is really important. Patient endurance is the best form of penance. Penance is a translation of the word tapas, which means making heat. And in ancient Indian tradition, tapasya was an extreme ascetic. So very, very popular in the Buddha's day, people really harming themselves to realise the truth. And the Buddha is saying, no, that is not the best kind of asceticism. That's not the best kind of penance. It's kshanti, patience, patiently enduring, forbearing in relation to all the really difficult stuff that is around in this life. other people being unpleasant to us, sickness, disappointments, bad governments, you name it. You think of all the things that make your life difficult. They just continually provoke. Well, if you can be patient in relation to that, that's the highest form of asceticism. You don't need to stick things in you to, pins and things to kind of practice a penance. You just need to be alive as a human being. As our teacher Sangharakshita said to a friend of mine, an order member, he said, he was asked, well, how do I practice? This person, by their own admission, is a very impatient person. And he said, how do I practice patience? And Sangharakshita replied, to be born in this world, to be a human being, everybody has to practice patience. I mean, you go mad if you didn't have a bit of patience, wouldn't you? You go nuts, or you'd really do some serious damage to others. Everybody's got to practice patience. He said, you either do it with joy or with resentment. And much better to do it with joy, for obvious reasons. So patient endurance is the best form of penance. And then immediately after that, nirvana is the highest, say the enlightened ones. Nirvana, in other words, enlightenment, that's the highest thing. But it's interesting, it comes straight after patience. Straight after patience, as if to say, if you could really practice patience, deep patience, nirvana's going to start opening up. The next verse is related, not to speak evil. Actually, another translation has, not to find fault. Not to find fault. Fault finding. A great Buddhist teacher named Naropa started a great song with the line, samsara is the tendency to find fault with others. That's what makes the misery of the world, fault finding. Constantly looking for faults. Constantly looking at other people, finding their faults, cynicism and all the rest of it. So perhaps nirvana is always finding goodness in others, all the time, in everything. Even in the midst of the most difficult things, the deepest suffering, looking for that, golden line, if you like, somewhere on the horizon, looking for that. Nirvana is the highest. And again, this is the sasana of the enlightened ones. So where are we? Time is running on, so I need to see where to go next with this talk. Really good things coming up. The next thing is to do with true value. The next two verses. Not even in a shower of money is satisfaction of desires to be found. Worldly pleasures are of little relish, indeed painful. Thus, understanding, the spiritually mature person takes no delight even in heavenly pleasures. The disciple of the fully and perfectly enlightened one takes delight only in the destruction of craving. Is it so? Again, this sort of contrast. Where are you placing your values? Is it in showers of money? And I'm sure, if showers of money would fall on me, I think I might be quite pleased. But anyway, it's not that. Worldly pleasure, little relish. I love this word relish. I think it's probably a translation of rasa, taste, relish. What do you relish? What do you? Where do you get that lovely flavour? And what he's saying is, what the Buddha is saying, is that actually the destruction of craving. In other words, it's always put rather negatively in these texts, but you have to imagine the other side. Deep contentment is what is going to bring the best relish. That's the most lovely flavour. When you're completely and content and at ease. You're not wanting, you're not craving, you're sitting there deeply at peace. That's the thing to really relish. And this opens up a very, very important set of verses which are to do with what you could call the unsafe, where am I? The unsafe and the best refuges. Many people out of fear flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, trees and shrines. In reality, this is not a safe refuge. In reality, this is not the best refuge. Fleeing to such a refuge, one is not released from all suffering. He who goes for refuge to the Enlightened One, to the truth, and to the spiritual community, and who sees with perfect wisdom the four Aryan truths, namely suffering, the origin of suffering, the passing beyond suffering, and the Aryan Eightfold Way leading to the pacification of suffering. For him, this is a safe refuge. For him, this is the best refuge. Having gone to such a refuge, one is released from suffering. So these are really, really important verses in the entire Buddhist tradition, and they're describing the expression of the fundamental Buddhist act of going for refuge. It's a very, very strange kind of idiom, sharanagamana, going for refuge. When those of you who've participated in Buddhist rituals here will know that there's a certain point in the puja where we chant the refuges. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami. To the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. The Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha are regarded as the source, the places of ultimate security and safety. They're what you can really rely on. Of course, people get a bit concerned about this. As soon as they hear about going for refuge, they worry that, well, isn't this escapism? Isn't that what you're doing as a Buddhist? Aren't you running away, from life? Well, of course, actually, everybody is looking for a refuge. This is what the verses at the beginning are all about. Many people out of fear flee for refuge to sacred hills, woods, groves, trees and shrines. Of course, this is, what the Buddha is describing is people going to their local shrines for security. They might be the shrines of local deities or something like that. And they're placing their reliance on those shrines, on those gods, on those places. When I lived in India, when I lived at our retreat centre at Bhaja, there was a tree near the retreat centre. It was obviously a sacred tree to the local villagers, and every so often people would come and sacrifice a cock there, and they do puja there and do all sorts of things. They regarded it obviously a place of security, but of course, how can it be a source of security? Because it's external. It's dependent on ever-changing conditions. Now, we might not do things like that, but we're often turning to things to make us feel all right, to make us feel safe, to make us feel protected, don't we? All sorts of things that we turn to, perhaps on a regular basis. We're struggling a bit. I know, let's go and get that bar of chocolate. Let's put Netflix on. Whatever it might be, there's something you're turning to, or a relationship, or career, or something like that. There are loads of things. You can look at your life. I get security from that. It makes me feel okay. It makes me feel all right. When things are going difficult, that's what I turn to. What about when that starts breaking down, or you start thinking, hang on, this just doesn't cut it anymore. This is deeply unsatisfying. This is not working. This thing that I've been doing, which I've invested so much in, is just not working. I'm just getting more and more miserable. Life is more and more meaningless. Well, it's no longer a safe refuge. So what does it mean to say that the Buddha is a refuge? I mean, it doesn't mean, I don't think, coming into the shrine room here, bowing down to the Buddha and thinking that this image is somehow going to save you and make you feel all right. I mean, it's a lovely image, it's a beautiful image in a beautiful shrine room, but that's not what it's going to do. That's there to remind you of a state of being and consciousness. Again, that ananta gotra, that endless sphere, that place, that domain of absolutely undiminished awareness and love and compassion, that, if you like, fount of all human qualities. So going for refuge to the Buddha is placing your reliance on that state, if you like, that realm, that domain, and seeing that you can realize it, turning to that. You might well imagine the Buddha to remind you of that state. So going for refuge to the Buddha is moving, using, if you like, the appearance of the Buddha, the figure of the Buddha, the descriptions of the Buddha, to describe that state which isn't going to let you down, which you want to become, which you are making every effort to move in the direction of. That's what going for refuge to the Buddha means. It's something incredibly dynamic and something that you have to activate in your own life. You have to activate the Buddha refuge. In a sense, you do need to bring the Buddha close to you. That's when you go for refuge to the Buddha. In a way, the Buddha starts to come near, because if you like, that aspiration to that consciousness in you is becoming more alive. So you start to feel greater proximity to the Buddha. And then going for refuge to the Dharma, well, this can be explained in many ways. It's the truth, the reality, if you like, of the Buddha has opened up. I tried to kind of indicate that in talking a little bit about Praticca Samuppada, that incredibly mysterious, wonderful way of seeing life. But it's more practical than that. It's that translated into a path. It's so good to have a path, to have, if you like, a regimen of practice, ethics, meditation, wisdom, liberation, compassionate activity, many, many descriptions of the path. It means that right now you can start doing something. You can start moving. So in other words, the refuge is something that you can immediately rely on and turn to. You don't have to think in terms of, the vastness of the Buddha's enlightenment. You have to think, what's the next step right now? I'm in this state, whatever it might be. What's the next step? What's the movement, if you like, towards the refuge? What's the Dhamma for me right now? The teaching, the practice right now to move me out of this into that. Where do I go? What do I do? That's the refuge, the Dhamma refuge. And then the Sangha, we make a lot of Sangha, of spiritual community, and we can sort of think that this is the Sangha. It's all the Buddhists together, all the lovely Buddhists in Bethnal Green, and we're all together, and that's our groovy Sangha. Strictly speaking, the Sangha as the refuge is what's called the Arya Sangha. It's those disciples of the Buddha who've moved into an irreversible movement in the direction of Buddhahood. If you like, it's the great figures of Buddhist history, who can inspire us and move us. And in a sense, those lives are a bit nearer to us. I mean, the Buddha's life in some ways is not an example, because he discovered enlightenment on his own. His disciples gain enlightenment through relying on his teaching. So they can be a tremendous inspiration for us. However, they can seem a bit far away. So yeah, our lovely Buddhists in Bethnal Green, they are our Sangha refuge in the sense, to the extent to which they are moving in the direction of the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. If you like, when we're at our best for one another, That's how we can be a refuge for one another. We can even aspire to become something of a refuge for others. I mean, one of the ways in which the Buddha talks about the best kind of friend, a real friend, a true friend, he says a true friend is a refuge to you. That's a true friend. Someone who never lets you down, who is always reliable. In other words, their friendship is unconditioned and unconditional. That's quite an ask of a friend. And the thing is, you can't demand that of others. You know, we often demand it of others, don't we? We've actually got to become that for others. So in other words, we can, as it were, use the beautiful Buddhists of Bethnal Green, if you like, use this context to become the refuge by becoming a true friend to one another, completely reliable in our responses of kindness, of awareness, of generosity, of support, and using it to move us, if you like, to move in the direction more fully towards Buddhahood itself, to be that ananta gochara. So we're very nearly at the end of the talk. Yes? So let's just end with the last two verses of the section of the Enlightened One. Here, the Buddha, in a way, kind of brings it down again to something near at hand. He talks about reverence, it's translated as here. The word is puja in Pali, which means worship. He's talking about you worship that which has worth, those who have worth. You revere those who have, from your experience of them, who have real weight for you, real quality for you. And it's such an important quality to be able to kind of look up. Not because you're forced to look up, because out of your communication and friendship with others, you see things, you see qualities which you really love and which really mean a lot to you and which lift you up and inspire you to, well, become a better person. He who reverences those worthy of reverence, whether enlightened ones or their disciples, those who have transcended illusion and passed beyond grief and lamentation, those who reverence those who are of such a nature, who moreover are at peace and without cause for fear, his merit is not to be reckoned as such and such. So in the act of revering others, of worshipping others in this way, of really genuinely looking up, you generate, the word is merit, such a poor translation of punya. It's a kind of atmosphere, an expansive atmosphere. I mean, that's what I notice with people who can sort of look up to others, genuinely. They're big people. They're not small people. They have a kind of atmosphere which generates, which communicates. That's what punya, what merit really is. They have a kind of positive aura around them. So there are a few reflections on the section of the Enlightened One. Do look up the Dhammapada, read the text, the whole of this chapter, chapter 14 in the Dhammapada. Perhaps in the light of what I've said, you might think, what has he been talking about? He just made all that up. I don't get that. And drop me a line and let me know. Thank you very much.
I want to say thank you before we all go off. Thank you for a brilliant talk, really evoking the Buddha, really evoking the Enlightened One. Really kind of made me think of that, well, what you were saying at the start there about it's just beyond the rational, really kind of set that tone up for that whole kind of talk, I think, of well, I said at the start, the Dharma above all interests, which of course is a complete kind of speak, because of course it's a passion for you, and that's what you really kind of evoked is a passionate response to enlightenment, which is, well, it's just really clear that that's what we need to. That's the kind of mind that we need to kind of engage with the goal with. So yeah, thanks for evoking what that looks like, kind of from without and from within as well, and what we can do about that as well in terms of kind of going for refuge. So yeah, thank you. Before we thank Padmavajra again, I'll just mention our next series. So we've just finished this series on Dhammapada. That was the climactic end of the Dhammapada series. We're going to be having another series now, starting next week on, well, we're calling it Sangharashta Classics. Each one of the those of us who are the regular teachers at this class have picked our favourite Bhante lecture. So Padmavajra mentioned Sangharashta there a few times, the founder of our order, and it's just we're hoping that it's going to be, well, we think it will be a really good way for people to kind of get to know what our tradition is about, and particularly kind of who our teacher is, and through us talking about teachings that have particularly affected us personally. So yeah, do come along to the rest of, well, this next series. But yeah, thanks again, Padmavajra.